Member Cook.
Here.
Member Janes.
Here.
Member Laz.
Here.
Chair Durham.
Here.
Let the record reflect that Scoggins is excused.
So if we might take a moment with our newest member, Laz. Maybe all of us can go down the road and just down the row and introduce ourselves and what we do in the community. Member Cook?
Kimberly Cook. I'm on the Yountville Arts Commission. I've been in town since 1998, and with a background in commercial interior design, I thought ZDRB was a perfect fit.
Thank you. Member Janes?
Jason Janes, Yountville native. I live here with my wife and children. I work in construction and development.
Member Laz, our newest member?
Carrie Laz. I have lived in Yountville since 2006 when I moved out here from the East Coast, and I'm the wine director for Dean and DeLuca. So it's nice to be here.
Good. Nice to have you. And then Chair Durham, I have been here, I want to say 13 years, and work out of the house, so I keep very busy in Yountville. So thank you. Everybody get a chance to look at the agenda? Any questions? All right. So someone make a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
And a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Perfect. We shall move on then. No minutes, so we shall move on to public comment with no public. We will, and then no consent. So we shall move straight into our public hearing. 7.1. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, well, I don't believe I have a statutory
Thank you.
conflict of interest, given the longstanding business relationship I have had with the owner of the complex. I will not participate in this item. I'll be outside reading my book.
Thank you. All right. Now we'll move on to 7.1 for the master sign plan amendment for the Countryside Shop at Piazza Quercia.
All right, good evening. Piazza Quercia
Quercia. Merci.
is a commercial complex that is subject to an approved master sign plan, and that allows a certain amount of signage for each of the businesses within the complex, and it is even allocated approximately 4.5 square feet for the two businesses. Oh, thanks. For the two businesses that are located off the courtyard so that they have a presence from Washington Street. In the Countryside, the applicant before you tonight is one of those businesses, and they are requesting an approximately 4.5 square foot sign that would be hung from the arch that is over the pathway that leads to that courtyard. It's a little over 1.25 feet in height and approximately 3.5 feet in width. And it will have copy for the Countryside, and that is the business name, and in capital letters that are 3 inches in height. Also proposed are 2 bylines, one for rural elegance and the other for gifts for home and garden. And these will be in just a little over 1/2 inch letters for most of the letters, up to 1 inch for the taller letters. As you can see, there's also a bouquet of flowers, and it will be bordered with a black band. And this slide shows a photo mock-up of how the applicant proposes mounting that sign from the arch that leads to the courtyard. And we find that the sign is generally in keeping with the master development plan and the town's rules for signage. We just have 2 concerns, and I'll mention those now. And our concerns have been incorporated into proposed conditions of approval for this project. The first concern relates to the byline for rural elegance. And as you know, businesses are permitted business identification signs for their name, and they can use generic non-specific terms for the principal goods sold where those are necessary to identify the business. And in this case, we think gifts for the home and garden really satisfies that standard. It lets a passerby know the principal goods sold at the store. It's also helpful for a business that doesn't have direct street frontage. We are concerned, however, with the term for rural elegance because this is a very unique descriptive term that is that goes beyond the basic goods and services sold. And for this reasons, it's somewhat at odds with the town sign ordinance and the preference for the minimal signage necessary to identify the business. Another problem that we have with that byline for rural elegance is how small those letters are. The bottom of the sign would be located at about 9 feet above grade, and these letters are just over a ½ inch in height. So the question is really whether they will be legible from the street. And we think that if that first line were removed for rural elegance, gifts for home and garden could be emphasized. It could be legible, and it would be more effective as a sign. So we are including that as a proposed condition of approval. Our other concern is that only the Countryside has stepped forward to request project signage, and yet 2 businesses are approved for this location. And if we look at the opening that's surrounded by the stucco portion of that entry, it's about 26.5 inches tall. And this proposed 15-inch sign would preclude the placement of a second sign within that very distinct area that's really well suited for a sign for that other business. And it would require that it be lowered and put beneath the, or between the brick portions, which will affect the proportions of the building and the signage. And while you will have the necessary clearance of 7.5 feet over above grade, that's really considered the minimum necessary, and we'd like to see both signs fit within that area. And we believe it can be done if the sign is reduced to about 12 inches in height, and it can be increased in width, and that will design this sign in consideration of the other sign for the time when that other business comes forward. And I think we can be certain that at some point we will see an application. So we want to plan for that now, and that's the reason that we've included the second condition, that it be decreased in height. So with the exception of those 2 changes that we're requesting, we are supportive of the application and the proposal is presented.
There's one other thing I just notice actually in this photo up here, that if there were another sign mounted in that space, how that would be, they have 2 cross members now, the sign is mounted to, how those would fit. And I think it would be worthwhile to consider the total solution of how those, because with this configuration, the other one would appear to have to come off the brick with those 2 bands that it's mounted on. And that might look a little asymmetrical for that space that's above the brick.
Thank you. Commissioner Cook, any questions of the staff?
No, this sign is only one-sided?
Correct.
Nothing from the backside? Okay.
Commissioner Laz, any questions of the staff?
No.
Thank you. I have none either, so with that, we shall move towards the applicant. Would you like to come up?
Hi, my name is Lisa Cox, and we opened a store, The Countryside, in Piazza Corsia, where Gordon Gallery used to be. And right now, we are running a store with no sign, so it's a little hard to be in business where no one can find you. When we came to Yountville, we were given, and this was at the end of May when we started the sign process, we were given the master sign plan only, and you have a copy of that and the section marked where it told us what size the sign should be. We followed those rules and made the sign exactly what we were told to make the sign. We also contacted the city several times, and we said to them, look, we're new, we want to do what you want us to do, so please tell us what you want us to do, and we will do that. We asked them for something in writing, and we were told that they had nothing in writing. We were then told that we could make a temporary sign, and it could be out of vinyl, And so I told my sign company that it could be out of vinyl, and they said, "You mean like a banner?" And I said, "No." They said, "No banner." So the sign company contacted the city and said, "What do you mean by vinyl?" And they said, well, they didn't really know what vinyl, they didn't really give us an answer. So they basically said, "Make it out of whatever you want." And my sign company wouldn't make the sign because they were afraid that it would then be the wrong thing. So what we were told was that no other businesses in Piazza Corsia wanted to hang a sign, and we were told to make it the dimensions that we made it. And now they want to remove part of the sign, which is fine, because they're afraid it can't be read, but now they want us to shrink the sign to 12 inches, which is going to make the font that much smaller anyway, so that kind of doesn't make sense to me. In the midst of this, they stated to us that they had changed their minds on the sign sizing. And that doesn't seem to be very fair to me, because they've already started the process with us, and to just all of a sudden now in August, when we started this in May, to say that they've changed their mind on the signage and the sizing, that doesn't seem very fair to us. Every time we go to the sign company, it costs us money. And sign companies, if you don't know this, are not inexpensive. So every time we go to them with another change, it costs us money. So we were never given the sign ordinance or any other thing other than the master sign plan, which stated for us to make the sign the size that it is. I have a suggestion. If this sign is causing so much trouble hanging it, that doesn't bother us at all. Why can't we utilize the brick pillars on both sides of the entryway? A sign could be made for the whole shopping center with slats that go across that state everyone who's in there, and then the slats would slide out in case a new tenant came in. The pillars to me seem like they would be seen, more visible to people walking down the street, easier to hang the signs, and it wouldn't cause such a problem for signage to be hung. Because there is also a concern of what you use to hang the sign. If it's windy, if it's rainy, will the sign move, et cetera. So I'm just proposing possibly we use the brick pillars for signage. And then last but not least, on the last page that I gave you is a picture of a sign that's in Yountville, in the ground. And I'm just kind of wondering, maybe possibly we could have one of those. I don't know what the rules are of who gets to have those near their shopping centers and who does not. But near Piazza Corsia, we have, of course, the Chamber of Commerce, we have wine tasting, a hair salon, and now a gift and garden and a bank. So we would love to have one of those little signs in the grass that point arrows that say, more shops and what the shops consist of. Anybody have any questions?
Very good, thank you. Any questions?
Is part of the process to submit a drawing of the sign before?
Yes, we
for
did that.
approval? Okay,
We did that.
okay. That's all I have.
Commissioner Les, any questions of the applicant?
I just had a question. You had just proposed to have it mounted into the brick, is that correct?
Well, I'm saying if it's causing so much problem now, because they were saying they wanted us to remove rural elegance because they didn't feel like the font was large enough.
Yeah.
But if they shrink the sign to a foot, it's going to make the font smaller anyway, so it's still not going to be legible from the street no matter how you look at the sign. It's going to be legible for people walking by.
So, any other questions?
No.
Is the sign that's hanging up in front of your window by the front door?
It is.
Is that what this sign would be hanging up?
That's the one by my front door.
That's exactly
It's exactly the same sign.
That's exactly what you would want to hang up?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Now, Commissioner Laz had a question about the dimensions of the entrance.
I just was wondering how high the clearance was where the brick, where she had talked about having the sign mounted into the brick. How tall is that?
It's 9 feet to the top of the brick.
To the top of the brick, okay.
What is before you tonight is the request for this sign, because design review and all the specifics of the sign are important. So we're looking at all the dimensions, all the sizes. If businesses were to use the brick pilaster to display signs, that is something that isn't before you tonight. And also, it sounds like the applicant was proposing more of a directional sign. We see those at James Beard Plaza, and what those are similar blades for each of the businesses that are really not individualized. They're to list all the businesses in the complex, so it wouldn't be an individual sign of this nature.
Oh, no, I'm not asking it for just for me. I'm asking it for the, like, the shopping center of Piazza Quercia.
All right. Then can we touch on the town sign program that's in place?
Sure.
The business town.
Yeah.
sign
Let me
program.
first
Wayfinding
mention
Well, that's why
the
I
flyer
wanted to
that,
ask, right.
the photo that the applicant submitted for Shops Health Club and Wine Tasting. This falls into the category of directional signs, and these were allowed prior to the town's wayfinding sign program. The wayfinding sign program will replace this, and it gives all businesses an opportunity to have their names on the structures that will be located at 13 or so different places in town.
Is there an idea of rollout for that? Timing?
We're actively working with the sign contractor, and applicants have submitted signs for proofs, and it's under construction.
Will this wayfinding sign for Shops Health Club Wine Tasting still be up because it was already up before the business wayfinding program, or will this go away?
We'll remove those.
That will be removed.
And if I understand, that's a little bit different than what the applicant is suggesting.
Correct. Correct. I just wanted to get a clarification on that. Can you speak to what the applicant stated about what sounded to me as if it was confusion on both sides of the expectations for the sign from the town?
Sure, I do appreciate the confusion and how the process may be hard for someone who's new to the process, and my apologies for that. What we did provide the applicant with was the approved master sign plan for the property, and it allocated just a general amount of signage to this project. It wasn't determined with specificity at that point because drawings weren't submitted, and it wasn't until these drawings came in and we could measure the dimensions in connection with the area that it was located that we could finally analyze the sign that was submitted. And I'm understanding that was sort of late in the process in the applicant's opinion, but that's the typical procedure we go through. I don't believe it's true that the town didn't advise the applicant that the town's sign ordinance is online, and that can be found and can be a helpful guide to those that are designing different projects. So my apologies that it was a difficult process or that there was some confusion. So.
If the applicant would like to speak, just please come up to the microphone so that everybody can hear.
I just wanted to state that we, again, started the process in May, and on August 5th, we were sent the sign ordinance. So throughout May, June, July, and August, until August 5th, it was never brought up, the sign ordinance at all to us, just the sheet of paper I provided you with the sign dimensions on it, which we followed to a T.
Okay, and if I hear Sandra correct, this sign ordinance is online, though?
It is.
Okay, and you didn't have access to that?
Well, we were never told it was online.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
we were never instructed to look it up online or that it was available online.
Okay, very good.
I mean, honestly, we want to just get a sign up. We want to do what you guys want us to do, and it's been a little making us crazy because we are trying to do what you want us to do, but there's nothing on, nothing on paper. So we were told that there's nothing written on paper, and so it's just sort of, if it's not on paper and you don't have specific guidelines, it's kind of hard to follow them when we're trying to do what you want us to do. I don't want to run a business without a sign up. It's not
I agree.
easy.
I agree.
So,
If, Sandra, did you have a statement?
Well, I do recall discussing it with the applicant's husband, some of our concerns with the proposed signage when they originally mentioned it, as to the rural elegance, because that wasn't consistent with the town ordinance rules for signage copy. And so I did specifically have those discussions. And of course, we do have rules, so.
but nothing on paper. And I'm a little confused because like with ad hoc, you know, they have this long sentence about what hunger is. So I'm not tied to rural elegance. I'm not here to fight for rural elegance. That I could care less about that. But I don't understand the reason behind it, because it's stated that the reason they want us to remove that is so that we can make gifts for the home and garden larger, but then they want us to make the sign 12 inches.
Correct.
So if you make it 12 inches, it doesn't matter. It's still going to shrink that font so small that it's not going to be legible in the street. And if you look at, for example, the wine place next to ours, Grozinger's, their sign has font that's this big, and you can only read it when you're standing under the sign.
I think
And I love his sign. You know, he's a great guy. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem to be consistent throughout the city.
Understood. I think we try to learn from our past as well.
Okay.
If I might clarify one point, I understand what you're saying about not having anything on paper, but the fact that the sign ordinance is online, it is available. Would you agree to that?
I would agree because I found out this evening, but had somebody told us about that, we would have been happy to. I mean, we don't want to make a sign and then have to spend more money. We would have definitely accessed that, but this was the only paper we were given for sign dimensions,
Okay, very good.
and we followed it.
Okay.
And now we've been told that they've changed their mind. So I just think that's really not fair to us when you've already started into a process with a business. If you want to change it, maybe you should change it with the next people, but to change it when you've already started a process with somebody, to me, just doesn't seem very courteous.
Understood.
Okay.
Anything else? No. You're all set?
Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's all right. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Commissioner Cook?
I mean, just general discussion
Yes,
of where
please.
to go from here.
Please.
Um,
Given, if I might also direct it towards the suggestions made by staff, the 4 points.
Yes.
Thank
yes.
you.
I think the town has been pretty specific in the past of what I've seen as I've been a part of this for the use of descriptive lines on signs, like we did for Kelly's Fuel. And so I understand and support the idea of leaving gifts for home and removing the rural elegance because it is more descriptive. As far as the sign, the size and such, it seems like it's time to have a discussion maybe with the property owner so that a plan can be made for how two separate signs can be hung and fit in that space. Because if we go ahead and approve one sign, then how are we gonna hang the second sign? That becomes difficult. It seems like that's a step that's missing here.
Well, I would suggest adding a condition of approval.
Very good. The applicant wants to say one other thing. Have we closed it off, or,
Sure.
excuse me, let her finish the
Okay,
the
absolutely.
thought in the conversation here, please. Go on, please, if you could.
Oh, so my thought was that we could add a condition that requires the applicant to submit a final mock-up so that the mounting of their sign in that space won't preclude the other sign, and that it could come in and be installed seamlessly, and they'll both take up that area surrounded by white stucco, and that it's all considered and thought out now.
And
Yeah.
that is what you're stating in provision 2, correct? Of your,
We may need to be more specific that they should submit a drawing to show how that's done so we can confirm it before it gets installed, and so that we're all on the same page.
all right.
I think it's important that we plan for two, because someday there will be two, and that the size of the signs reflect being able to fit in that space, because I think it's a good space for the signs and a reasonable request to have signage there so that people can find the businesses inside.
One last thing
Okay.
from the applicant.
So you won't consider signage on the brick pillars?
That's not a consideration at
Okay.
this point.
The thing is if the signs have to be 12 inches, my neighbor has stated that she doesn't want to hang the sign because, well, she's just not interested for many reasons, but she's also mentioned the 12-inch sign and said, you know, who can even read a 12-inch sign? So
Correct.
if
but
they're going to be 12 inches, do you realize how small that is?
But given your situation where Gordon's Gallery was not interested in doing it, and now you're interested in doing it, same situation could arise with the current,
Right, but I don't know that I'm even interested in a 12-inch sign. I mean, the countryside itself, the letters would be so small on a 12-inch sign that I don't think anybody would be able to read it.
Anything else?
No.
Very good, very good, thank you. Thoughts, Commissioner Lass?
One thing I wanted to mention, and this is not their primary sign, or intended to be. It's intended to give notice there's a couple additional businesses down the breezeway. They are, in the original sign program, allocated a sign for the business, both of those, Miss Dixie's and this business. Gordon's had one on the building off of Oak Circle. Now granted, they're in concealed locations, but that's just the nature of the location. And these are really more directional for pedestrians rather than to be read in a passing car. And so when we're talking about size of the sign and letters, keep that in mind.
Thank you, Bob. Commissioner Lass, your thoughts?
You're proposing to make this sign how? The new sizes would be what? From a 3 by 16 to a 12 by?
Will it be reduced from 15 inches to 12 inches in height, and then it could be increased in width accordingly to be 4.5 square feet. So there's some redimensioning that's necessary. The applicant's sign contractor would be the one to propose that.
Okay. My thought is to plan on somebody building an additional sign that's been in that building for however long, I don't know how long they've already been there for, and have not built a sign yet, on the chance that they might build a sign, and to limit this proposed sign. It doesn't, to me, it's limiting them and on the chance that the other person might come forward. I mean, how long has Dixie's been there? It's been there for well over a year. Yeah.
Well, we want to look at it from a land use perspective, where what can happen over the next, let's say, 50 years to be extreme. So when Miss Dixie's moves out and the next tenant moves in, how are we planning for the future? And once the sign is in place, it locks the proportions of the area in. So you're right, though. Miss Dixie's hasn't expressed an interest up to this point.
Anything else?
Nope.
You know, it is frustrating because, I mean, a lot of things in this town are very different. All you have to do is look at Piazza
Where's the?
Quercia, thank you, and then look at Heston, you know.
Yes.
But they're both two dynamic buildings in this town. And you know, I just think at some point, we can't wait for the change for the next person. We need to at least be a little proactive and looking down the road as well. And as a business owner, I understand your confusion, your frustration, excuse me, not confusion, because I just changed all the signs on my business as well, at quite an expense. But I still think the fact that the sign ordinance is online is an important point as well in terms of staying informed as a business owner. So, with that being said, we need to move forward with a motion. I would be happy for one of the commissioners to make a motion. If not, I can try to put one together.
I,
Right there.
yeah.
Right there, you turn to it.
Well, did we decide if we wanted them to build in a condition of approval of working with the property owner to develop a
That-
plan for 2 signs?
That,
You guys are both
we did
shaking
not.
your head. Okay.
think
I
it just
don't, I
prolongs
just
it.
wouldn't want to add another layer in my,
Yeah,
in my
it's just
opinion,
adding more to,
Okay.
But that's my thought.
Then I make a motion to approve staff's recommended conditions of approval.
So the signed copy shall consist of the countryside gifts for home and garden only. The height of the sign shall be reduced in size to the 12, so that the above opening on the brick post can accommodate 2 signs of equal size of a submitted drawing, correct?
Good idea.
The design review approval for the sign will expire 2 years from the effective date of the approval if construction has not been commenced. And also the reminder that no portable freestanding signs are visible from the right-of-way. Is that your motion?
Well done. Thank you. Yes,
I just
it
wanted to
is.
confirm. Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have a second?
I second it, and I think that this just needs to be changed then, so it's, so it makes sense for the next person who reads it.
So that's the master plan. Very. So, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? To pass, yes. All right, so the motion passes, so thank you very much for your time and your effort.
Somebody email me exactly what
Would
it
I-
is that you guys want?
What I might suggest
I'll do
is
that.
that possibly first thing in the morning. Is that possible, Sandra? First thing in the morning, you will get the exact step-by-step process and
Okay.
dimensions of
So it's going to be
everything.
12 inches?
It needs to be 12 inches, and then the
Height.
width, the 12 inches in height, it sounds as if the width can
And the width
fluctuate a
is
little
the
bit.
same?
No, it can be adjusted.
It can
So you have
change.
4.5 square feet.
Pardon me?
The width will be adjusted to allow you to have a sign of 4.5 square feet.
Okay. Okay, so
And then
you'll-
all of, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. All that will be in the email for your first thing, so there'll be no confusion.
okay,
All right?
thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. If Commissioner Janes would like to put his book down and come back in. Maybe I'll get Commissioner
Where
Janes.
did he go? Outside in the sun.
In the sun.
It's a good book.
Whether it's a good design or not. I know. Doesn't pay to.
he locked out?
No.
He's coming.
It's over here, Jeff.
This is like a metal suit here.
I know. It's a bit too heavy.
Man, that was harsh. She totally took down staff on that one.
35 minutes. I mean, y'all feel. All right. So, we shall move on to presentation and discussions. We will talk about landscape design standards. Sandra?
All right. This item arises out of the one we brought to you at your last meeting for property maintenance, and landscape design is a necessary first component to landscape maintenance. And currently, the town's code is structured as loose guidelines for landscaping. There are no strict requirements. There's not a minimum amount of area that must be devoted to live plants. The types of plants aren't called out in the code. There's not a prohibition of using hardscape for some or all of your front yard. And what we see is that landscaping is reviewed during the design review process. And recently, you've seen extensive landscape designs for the Vineyard Oaks project on Staggs View Lane. That was 12 different single-family homes in a development. We also see design review when applicants have come forward in Old Town to raise a structure and start fresh and do a complete redevelopment of the property, and landscaping is an important component. So in these types of projects, we see high-quality, well-thought-out plans. And what is ultimately planted is the decision or at the impetus of the designer and the owner, what they like. We also see design review for renovations of landscapes, and whether that comes before you or not hinges on the decision of whether it's a minor and incidental, which could be approved, say, at staff level, or whether it's more major. And as you recall, 7 Forester was recently brought before this board. It was a complete re-landscaping plan, but it also included structural changes to the porch. It included stone walls that changed the appearance of the front yard, and other aspects that had a design review quality, so it wasn't just strictly landscaping. Not always do owners of property check with staff before they do a complete renovation, and we're working with a property owner now that has significantly modified the look of the yard, and we're working on getting drawings and how to process it after the fact and what the approval process is. So we do believe that the design review process is valuable in reviewing landscaping, but in the absence of any standards, it's at an applicant's decision. I have some photos here I wanted to go through with you. This is an example of a front yard landscape that's completely white rock. And if this were to come before you for design review, I don't think it would be approved. There's not a single plant, and I think it's understood that landscaping should at least have some plants. This project predates the design review ordinance, so we haven't seen it, and we won't see this property until they submit a discretionary permit for review, when we can look at it. Here's another example of a property that has a front yard of hardscape, and this line right here is the back of the sidewalk. So you can see that most of the front yard is paved, but it's somewhat softened because they do have landscaping in front of the house. Here's another example where a significant amount of hardscape is used. I also want to call your attention to the fact that hardscape can be used in a way that may be appropriate for town, and where owners are considering the water efficiency of the landscape. And so devising a rule that hardscape is prohibited or must be limited, we would need to discuss if you're interested in looking at this further. Here's a landscape that is predominantly DG, and with a small amount of landscaping. We see that again here. And this is the property I mentioned a moment ago where the landscaping was done before staff was contacted. This area of compacted DG is a bare spot without landscaping at the front, and we're working with the owner to understand why this was the decision they made. This is an example of xeriscaping, and it's a design where you use different methods to minimize water use, and I think that's important in town. It's also important with the model water efficient landscape ordinance that's applied, but that doesn't necessarily apply to our smaller parcels in town. Some other examples here are a lawn that may have looked wonderful when it went in, but it's a little scrappy and bare at this point. However, this is also a lawn that has been allowed to go dormant over the summer months, but there's enough landscaping so that it's not the predominant thing you see. This is a landscape where a shrub was planted, a hedge shrub was planted at the street, but as you can see behind it, it's just bare soil, and it's not a cohesive design or complete. This is a landscaping that may be considered overgrown, so we're presenting this to you as a question as to whether the town's landscape design standards are working, whether there are certain things that you see that you would like to prohibit. And this is a method that we employed when we redid the design standards for Old Town, where Mediterranean and Tuscan-style homes were not deemed to be compatible with the look of the neighborhood. Well, maybe yards that are 100% paved are not in keeping with that standard, but some sort of combination is. So I just raised that for your discussion and consideration.
Thank you.
I was just going to follow up with the comment that what Sandra mentioned about there was a subcommittee of the council and ZDRB members composed of 2 members each, and they were looking at standards in Old Town, and a couple of things came out of that one. One may be the approach, at least, applicable to taking on this question. It ended up being what we don't want to see, as opposed to trying to come up with palettes and what we do want to see, and leave the homeowner the freedom to design their own landscaping with the exception of prohibited items and materials. That subcommittee, they essentially came up with the conclusion of moving away from the Tuscan style, and also they were examining how in Old Town, the edge of the AC roadway met the driveway, and the driveway could be a number of treatments. It could be gravel, it could be paved, it could be asphalt itself. And then there's that strip that's the shoulder that is frequently, well, it's gravel or some that's required to be, can't be paved. And how those two meet, and in the end, they decided to extend whatever the driveway material was out to consistently meet and conform with the AC edge, as opposed to having the sandwich effect of continuing the gravel of whatever either side through, and having say a concrete drive and a gravel shoulder and then the street AC. So that came out of that effort as well. But the approach, again, is maybe looking at what is avoiding what we don't want to see and listing that. So and I think there's 2 questions here. One is what's an acceptable look, and the second is how it's maintained in the end, and gets to a state to where it becomes a nuisance. And that's really an aesthetic question, where that line is crossed.
Thank you, Bob. Would anyone, or shall I start to my right? Commissioner Janes, do you mind starting on your thoughts on this?
Sure, they're not quite together yet, but I'll take a start.
Thank you.
One of the things I liked in the staff report, you were sensitive to the burden on applicants, particularly for a replanting project or a simple project of having to run water demand usage calculations. And I think that's good. At the same time, I think perhaps we can split the baby. And I would encourage the town to, for example, look to the city of Napa, which has, I believe it's their water-wise landscaping palette. And we can say from this box, any of these plants are approved. If you use within this box, it's administratively approved. Doesn't prohibit you from going outside the box, and whether it's at staff level or here at the board, soliciting approval for a particular plant palette, running the water demand calculations if necessary. But I would like property owners to have the ability to do something knowing it can be approved, because there is at least some sort of standard palette. And I would think that the town could come up with that without a great deal of difficulty, whether it's the Firewise landscaping program in the county, or again, the Waterwise, I believe it's in the city of Napa. So there are 2 paths for a person to take. Secondly, I think it would be wise to establish a maximum area, I don't know whether that should be a percentage, I think so, of non-planted area. I think we can, and similarly, if a person says, well, I want to have more non-planted area, I think then we have a trigger with stormwater calculations. Show us how you're not generating additional runoff. But a person could come in and know that if, to pick a number, no more than 25% of the non-structure area, non-home, non-garage, is non-planted area, I think that's 3 negatives, isn't it? It's okay. We have to be cautious of permeable versus impermeable. There's a lot of good reasons to have permeable surfaces that may not be the landscape palette. I do agree that there should be a thrust towards greater water conservation. So anything we can do, as I say, with a list of plants. We could also, I think, give people the opportunity to say with sufficient documentation if all of your plants fall below X threshold of water demand. One can go online immediately to Monrovia Nursery, the biggest nursery in the West Coast, and say, lilies of the Nile require X number of gallons a week in our climate zone. Right, so I think we can give sort of some prescriptive standards.
I wanted to make one comment that was triggered by your remark, is that that's very in keeping with the what's called WELO, the Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance. It's a state mandate. And basically, they give you a calculation of water. When this ordinance is triggered, and it's infrequently triggered here, you've got to have, as was shown in the staff report or commented, 5,000 square feet of area you're landscaping for a homeowner installation, and that's a big yard.
I quite agree, Bob, and I was glad you noted that in there, and so I think this is a way to drop those standards down, which is one of the suggestions you make. I think, as you just noted,
Yeah, and
doesn't
in this
happen often.
WELO ordinance, you get an allocation of water, and then how it's divvied up among your plant groups. You can have a lawn, and it's very water consumptive, but it's taking up a lot of your allocation. And so, and then there's other rules about, they don't want little patches of lawn. They want an area that the lawn has to be of a certain minimum area that, so you're not watering and mowing little remnants of lawn around your yard.
Interesting.
So anyway, good approach. And there are lists called WUCL's lists that talk about how, I think it stands, acronym for water use, and it's a list of plants and what they're expected to use and evapotranspiration rates. And so that information is available.
Excellent. And my final recommendations or suggestions would be, I do agree with you that on balance, it's good to find things to simply prohibit, whether you use the example of Tuscan-style homes. I was very much part of that committee. But give the second path of here's a stock set of approval. But I agree with the thrust of here are things that are just simply not permitted. Lastly, long-term, I would urge the town to, as a producer of recycled water, and we continually see water mains being replaced and updated, which is good, start considering running purple pipe throughout town. And while it can be very difficult mechanically, I would long-term love to see dual water meters. So even if it were our North Bay Aqueduct or Rector Reservoir water, 2 structures of water usage, that's really how we would get behavior to change. If I pay twice the amount for showering, for watering my lawn as I do for showering, people will really have a great incentive. Now, I know mechanically that's tough to prevent people from cross-connecting after the inspection, but I do think there are some workarounds. So that summarizes.
Yes. The distribution system is lacking for using our tertiary treated wastewater, which is sold to vineyards for irrigation. It could be used in the parks, but we don't have a distribution system, and that was examined when the mile bikeway path was going in, that we would put it under that to bring it up to North Washington, Yountville Park. And the thing of it was, that project had to come together really quick. There were agencies at the state we were dealing with, Caltrans
Sure.
mainly, and it was expensive to add that.
I don't doubt it, and I
Prohibitively
understand Caltrans. I think of something you pointed out when I first started working, Bob, and that's the existing nearly complete, what I've always thought is a triumph of good planning here in the town, the walking path, of which, and the Yountville Mile, of course, is part of a future rim trail around the Bay
Rim
Area.
trail.
So it might take a long time, but the next time Washington Street is dug up, put in 200 feet of reclaimed water main. And suddenly we see you can almost completely walk around town on this path that, when did it begin? 20 years ago? No, and you've been a big part of that over time as the properties came up and it was the time to do it, and it got done. It's a long-term investment. I think that would help ameliorate the big initial cost of trying to do it all at once.
Yeah, and on that other point, there was a recent, the Vineyard Oaks subdivision originally was aiming to put in a gray water system on each house to where they would irrigate the landscape around the house using reused water from the house. And at that time, the county environmental health would allow it, wouldn't allow it, would allow it, and then I think they are now at this point allowing it. There's some uncertainty there whether that was going to be allowed. In the end, they did not go with that system, but it was a good idea and could happen on an individual homeowner if they were interested in putting in the gray water system.
Thank you, thank you. Commissioner Lass?
Well, since I'm not as well versed on the water usage and all of this, I'm not gonna comment on that part. Purely from an aesthetic point of view, I do think percentages of what you said, hardscaping percentages, I think it would be good to have some sort of guideline. And then an absolute, this is our, this is what's permitted and this is actually what's not permitted, I guess.
Thank you. Commissioner Cook?
I agree, that was something on my list too, a percentage of plants versus hardscape. Well, and we can also divide, dryscape or hardscape. I mean, I don't know that there's any need for doing the front of your yard in hardscape, in paving and plants. I would say, I would make it more strict that you can't do any paving of your front yard, but you could do dryscape and plants. That's just my thoughts. And is there any consideration, like when we talked about our discussion in the last meeting about the municipal code and maintenance and things like that, is there any intention to make this a parameter that would be used to approach existing yards?
From the maintenance standpoint of,
I mean, is that all?
Well, from some of the photos we saw, if I might, is that what you're getting at?
Well,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
oh, you mean to retroactively enforce that they,
Do something?
yeah.
yeah.
Is that part of the intention? I mean, is
it's-
that,
Well, on a remodel, if they were, usually when something is in and it followed the rules that were in force at the time it was installed, it's considered non-conforming, and we don't aggressively, go after them we don't really have the means to do that. It's accepted because it followed whatever rules or lack of rules were in place at the time. So it would be difficult. Actually, Yountville's posture on non-conforming everything is fairly lax. And when you compare it to other cities, if a building's non-conforming, it's say a use that's in a zone that is incorrect for that rules that are in effect now. Other cities, they put the building on an amortization schedule based on the useful life of the building, and at that point in the future, there is a date that it has to be returned to a conforming use. We don't have that. Non-conforming buildings can be maintained and kept in good repair indefinitely. They can't be expanded or enlarged.
True.
If they burn down, they could be even rebuilt with a use permit approval from the town council. So we don't aggressively go after situations that are considered non-conforming, and that, I think the yards would fall under that
But some of the things could fall under the maintenance end of it. Like the overgrown yard with trees, if the weeds were never mowed and the dead branches, then
Yeah.
that could be approached on a maintenance point.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question of at one point, or at what point does a installation itself present a nuisance
Right.
from an, you know,
Yeah.
if we get into, it's kind of a fine line of the aesthetics of something presenting a nuisance. That's a difficult line to
I agree.
draw. And,
So you're kind of only left with maintenance to be able to make request changes.
yeah, to make them do otherwise than what they've installed. And I will say, we're finding more and more second homeowners that want the no fuss, no muss, low maintenance landscape and
Sure.
some of that going on.
That's where I think the percentage type thing would help. You know, a certain percent has to be plants of some sort, on a list or something like that.
You had a point.
Oh, I wanted to mention on this photo, when the weeds get bad, we can ask them to remove them, and so our action is, with that part of this project, we can't make them plant plants until they come in for a discretionary permit.
Could you, if this homeowner, for example, said, I would like to replace my windows, and appropriately applied for design review to replace his windows? Well, I would, as a resident, love to see that gravel go away and turn into something, as a board member, I would say there's no nexus between replacing the windows and compelling them
I know.
to put in
There
new
isn't.
plants. So
That's a ministerial action with a building permit rather than a discretionary one where we could trigger design review. And where a window replaces a window opening, that's considered minor and incidental, and it
no,
would fall
let's
within the
assume that the
exemption.
windows are getting enlarged, one's turning into a door. And that there's no question that a discretionary approval is required and that it's appearing before, for design review. I would still submit there's no nexus there between the undesired condition of the front yard and improving the windows. And I would, in a
have a
situation
strong
like
point
that,
there.
I would expect to vote, if I like the windows, yes, put in the windows. It'd be nice if you fix your front yard, but again, I think the principle of nexus is really important, that somehow the two things need to be tied together. Otherwise, it's a never-ending balloon. Well, go in your backyard and do this. All you want to do is change out your front door into a much nicer, somewhat larger door. But to do that, the burden is $100,000 worth of other improvements. That's really a disincentive to make anything nice, or to do the Yountville path in sections if you can only build it all at once.
Good
I
point.
agree. And to the end that I was saying, I would want to see no paving in the front yard. I also think maybe we need to go to the other end, places like Vista condominiums that are just endless grass and endless fertilizer that stains the sidewalks. You know, that there's some restriction on how much lawn you can put in too. Just a
That's
thought.
a 70s look that,
No, but
you know,
my
that-
gosh.
when O'Brien built Yountville Square, they, as a mitigation, took they drilled a well for Vista, and
I remember that, yeah.
now they use well water to irrigate the grass, all that grass. But prior to that, the consumption of water at Vista was in excess of 13 acre-feet annually to water everything, of potable water.
Yeah. That's insane.
So now we're on a well system out there, but they did that to offset the water for their project
Oh,
that
okay.
was eventually built.
Yeah, because we were on a moratorium. Okay.
Thank you.
I didn't know that.
Just last thing I want to bring up too is that you had stated that even though it's an undue, it would be a burden. You know, it's, as all the commissioners have touched on, it's 2014. I think it's time that we help others be responsible for their water usage. I've said it before, and I will say it again at this point. I think we have a great opportunity living here in Yountville, and a lot of people desire to do business and live here, and I don't think there's anything wrong with giving them a set of standards that they need to adhere to in terms of these would be your right choices. no more than 25%. These are your right plants to choose for here, and here's our expectations. Because, I mean, you had said a Welo Design Landscape needs a landscape professional, but there's plenty of opportunities out there, as Commissioner Janes brought up too, to find that information and get it without it becoming an undue burden. And I would hope that if you're doing your landscaping, you're putting a little extra time and thought into it, you're going to spend that extra time too to ensure that it's compliant with what our expectations are as well. And you know me, I have no issue to make them come before us to paint their house, so I'm fine with all that.
I have really great comments, thanks.
What, I was not able to view the town council meeting on August 6th, where they were going to talk about, you were going to present to them our discussion about the
I
municipal
wasn't
code?
there, but Bob presented.
Yes.
How did it go?
You know, they really pivoted on a lot of the ZDRB comments that were forwarded for their consideration and agreed with them. The general upshot of the meeting was that they were, the term that came out of the ZDRB was overreach, and they certainly were agreeing with that. And there were only a couple of areas where they felt as though we could move forward with this effort, and it had to do with a more expanded list of what constitutes a nuisance. And also, what was the other one? They generally, my recollection is wanted to stay out of backyards, unless it was some kind of health hazard or safety. They did not seem to really want to set up a schedule for toters and when those have to be put away, other than some reasonable standard. Parking in driveways was another thing discussed here, and they were not, maybe extend it to inoperable and unregistered cars, but that are just sitting there for months on end. But if they're licensed and operable, and they did not want to put a prohibition on somebody parking in their driveway for more than 72 hours. Seemed to be one other area that I was trying to... Garbage cans. Oh, garbage cans? Yeah, the toters? Yeah. They, like I said, they didn't want to, other than some reasonable standard, want to put a timeline on when you got to have them away, put away.
So will there be, what happens to those things from that point? Does it go back to a committee to work on those?
Well, I think we will probably look at expanding that list of nuisances. You know, I guess the question that remained unanswered for staff is some clarity on what constitutes a nuisance, and that's a little vague depending on which end of that issue you're on. To us, we may look at something and it's clear, and to the homeowner, they just think that's living. And so didn't get that out of it, but we will have a better list, I think, to apply. They didn't, also, the Welo thing came up, and the general tenor that I took away from it is that they weren't prepared to have a more strict and stringent interpretation of Welo and place additional cost burden on residents. That's what I took away from it as well.
Because nobody buying a home in Yountville is concerned about cost. That's interesting to me. The people buying a home in Yountville can accommodate that cost. I'm sorry, but I'll put myself out there and say that.
Yeah, I think it was more of a, they were hesitant to place additional regulations that will result in a cost incurred by a property owner when they're not seeing maybe the issue to a significant level that needs to be addressed. And
So should we wait to address that level in 2025, or should we address it in 2014 before it becomes an issue?
are you referring to Wello or?
Yeah, things,
Yeah.
I mean, the garbage cans, it is what it is. I mean, but things like Wello, I think, are too important to push off till later. And I mean, I think it was clear of this group that it would be very nice to give anybody coming in to the planning department guidelines of the expectations of what your plan, of how you're going to move forward. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So, sorry.
And they were, some of them, I would say, probably unanimous. Whatever changes are made, they wanted to try to involve as much of the community in that conversation as possible.
That involvement will come 2 weeks later by a letter to the editor in the Yountville Sun. Sorry, but I'm done. So,
I know. I wondered if we should reply. I was tempted to reply to that letter about,
as the chair of this commission, I have replied before. I would strongly love to see anybody to reply. Heston came up so many times in this community that it's frustrating for those of us who are involved to see those comments. To feel like someone was left out, and
Yes.
every point that was made in that letter was brought up at all of the meetings.
we have the same problem with the art commission.
Sorry,
where
I'm done.
we do letters to try and explain how and why we do things, and we get the same response.
So, sorry, Bob. You
Unfortunately.
can go.
Okay, so this will go down the same path? This idea will go to town council?
Yes.
Sort of with our comments and see what they want to do with it?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, staff reports for the ad hoc committees. Sandra?
Well, I included in the packet the roster for each of the 3 ad hoc committees, and you can see there's a vacancy on each of them. And we have 3 ZDRB members that haven't been appointed to the committees. Jason Scoggins is one of those members, so I would suggest that we would hold over this discussion until next time. But what the goal would be was that we would discuss what the committees are, what the potential work items are, and to see what the interest is, so that the council could then appoint according to that interest. I will quickly go through these since we do have 2 new members, so they know what these committees are. The first is the Zoning Ordinance and Design Ordinance Amendment Committee. And I would say that that one has generally completed the scope of its work. So if you're not wanting to be involved in a committee, that might be the one to select. The Historic Resources Ad Hoc Committee is the one that we are most wanting to pick up. We were simply waiting to have someone appointed so that we can have the next meeting. We've had 1 or 2 meetings of that board. We have some direction, and we want to proceed with the discussion of what different actions we could potentially take. The third is the Zoning and Design Review Board Bylaws Authority and Procedures Committee, and this committee will look at those items. One of the questions is changing the way the board gives recommendations. We've, changed that internally, and the council is pleased with the recommendations that are coming before it with more certainty and more direction. But some potential items of discussion could be forming a more formal planning commission versus this advisory board, and so those are some of those issues. But let's discuss it next meeting.
So if I want to volunteer, I wait till next time? For one of them? That's fine.
We could put you down as a maybe, or
The bylaws one seems
interests?
a good fit.
yeah?
Okay.
My question, and you can answer it at the next meeting, is to me, it's a contradiction in terms to have standing ad hoc committees. That an ad hoc committee should be formed with a specific mission, and then it disbands when it's done. So you mentioned the Zoto Committee. That was a great experience, and I thought it was very productive, and I think that committee should be disbanded. It no longer serves a purpose. And when such time is it's necessary to reinstitute it, assign new members. no doubt the constitution of the board will have changed, and for that matter, the council. So I don't think there need be standing committees, with the possible exception of the bylaw committee, because that conceivably could be a committee that might, well, even there, they're not taking any decisions. The council can, anytime, change the rules if there were some accident circumstance they needed to change. So guess I'm questioning the whole purpose of standing committees.
Well, that's a good point. I do want to mention why we haven't disbanded the Zoto committee, and that's because we introduced an item for discussion that we haven't brought to resolution, and that was outdoor music. Also included didn't we discuss that at that meeting? I thought we raised the item for
Not that I
discussion.
recall, but I'm sure you're right.
Music that is aired outside of a business that can be heard from the sidewalk. We were also thinking that holiday
Oh, God,
lights
yes, we did.
could be included in that. And, discussing these issues with landscape design standards, that could be something that we have y'all meet again for. So,
So in that
might
instance,
not
there
be
would be a
done.
specific set of tasks.
yeah. Correct.
Okay.
It's back.
All right.
Could I
Yes, Bob?
back one step up? And I did want to, it occurred to me at the council meeting, say that the council very much appreciates the approach the ZDRB took on reaching a consensus on items. And I'm thinking of that same thing coming out of our discussion tonight. And I think we have enough as far as a consensus on the percentage of landscaping planted area required, and water conservation and runoff concerns of other surfaces that are used. So we'll write it up in that fashion, because they do like it when there is an agreement among the ZDRB members.
Good. Good, thank
Good.
you.
Seems like it would be more helpful. Okay.
Very good. Any other comments or thoughts?
Nope.
Excellent. We will adjourn to our next meeting. Thank you very much.